Hi everyone, English Studies Department. This audio lesson is addressed to my Introduction to Literature is for students. So after the thorough analysis of the short story The Telltale Heart of Edgar Allan Poe, its characters, setting, themes and point of view, I will try in this audio to concentrate more on the stylistic or rhetorical devices used by the writer to reach the desired effect he wanted to create in the story. So Poe is best known or well known by his Gothic works in which he recurs the theme of death that made them part of dark romanticism. In many of his short stories, he portrayed characters who oftentimes suffer from a mental disorder of some sort, and his short story The Telltale Heart is not an exception. It is by no means different. In it, he presents a portrait of a mental deterioration and paranoia, a story about an unnamed narrator who tries to show his hypersensitivity as evidence of his sanity. The behavior of this personality was highly contradicted and paradoxical, which could be seen as an application of the Freudian psychology and mental disorder. So since Poe's tale does not in fact explain the narrator's past experiences, the reader is left to wonder about what made him the way he is, having to stand up every midnight in order to take a peek at the old man's sleeping, and seeing him again in the morning to ask him about how he passed the night. Contemplating over and over again on how to get rid of the evil eye and the beating sound of the heart, his life seemed to be one dreadful routine. But the consternation of the evil eye and the beating sounds of the heart and the ramifications of the deranged mind are so entangled in the narrative account of the storyteller that a close study of the stylistic and literary devices can help the reader work out the intricacies of the narrative. So this is why this audio lesson is meant to be a stylistic analysis of Poe's story, The Telltale Heart, in an attempt to demonstrate how stylistics could be useful in deepening our understanding and appreciation of a literary work. Stylistic analysis as a methodology is important to understand texts as well as their contents. That's how language works within a text. It also helps to look at a piece of a text from one's own perspective, and the analyzer can develop an argument based on literary and rhetorical terms, ignoring the author's intentions. Stylistic analysis in literary studies is usually made for the purpose of commenting on quality and meaning in a text. This is said, I recommend that you reread your short story in the light of what I will try to pinpoint. By examining the stylistic devices in The Telltale Heart, we may have a clear picture of how the sense of terror is conveyed throughout the language and how readers interact with the text accordingly. The way Poe writes and uses language and punctuation could very well be the reason behind being considered as one of the greatest American writers. His economical style of writing is a key instrument in making this story amazing. He uses his style to truly bring out what he intended for the story, a study of paranoia. He uses a lot of stylistic devices to reach the solicited and desired effect of the story, to make it more colorful and interesting. As I will try to demonstrate, this story is really rich in use of stylistic devices. From the narrator's protestation about his sanity in the opening lines to his confession in the last, every carefully crafted nuance of tale contributes to a frighteningly charged effect. Poe strips the story of excess detail as a way to foreground the narrator's or the murderer's obsession with certain issues, that is to say, his own plea of sanity, the old man's eye, and the heartbeat. His economical style, simple, concrete diction, and complicated syntax, repetition, and parallelism at various linguistic levels, and other rhetorical devices altogether contribute to the single effect that he has wrought out for the telltale hearts. I solicit here your attention and concentration while I am listening and commenting on the different literary rhetorical devices in the short story. The first device is symbolism. If we want to define symbolism, it is the use of symbols to signify ideas and qualities by giving them symbolic meanings different from their literal sense. Poe is famous for his use of symbolism. In most of his poems and short stories, he has used symbolism to have an idea of his own views about various things such as life, love, death, etc. His work, through a use of symbolism, clearly mirrors his opinions. In the story, he has used various things which carry symbolic significance. So the first item or the first symbol is the old man's eye. The eye is a symbol of narrator paranoia and insanity, as there was no obvious reason to kill the old man. As he says, I'm quoting, "Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold has no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold." End of quote. So we also see the old man's essence through his eye. It is described as a pale blue eye with a film over it. It indicates a lack of visual clarity and reliability of the man. That's why he didn't trust people and was afraid of surrounding world. The narrator only wants to get rid of the eye. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, he says. And as eyes are the mirror of the soul, the narrator describes it as the eye of a vulture. Vultures, which feed upon the dead, are always present and diligent and see everything, symbolizing penetration. So the narrator is frightened that the old man will see deep into his fears. The eye, as the conscience of the narrator, knows well about his evil plans and pricks him from time to time, but he does not follow his conscience path and decides to destroy it. He connects old man's eye with an image of death when he calls it vulture's eye. Whenever it fell upon him, he said, his blood ran cold. So the eye further has been described in separation from the old man because he is a kind man himself, and this separation has been done by the narrator in his extreme insanity, because when it is separated, it becomes an object which should be murdered. The eye is not the reason of the narrator's sanity. He is already mad, not aware of the fact that insanity makes him interpret the abnormal-looking eye in a wrong way. In his conclusion, he needs to get rid of the old man's sight. The narrator is unable to see virtues in the old man. What he sees is only the eye as a murderous hallucination, and he is driven mad when the lantern's light falls on the eye. In the end, his inability to see clearly results in his own betrayal. In his own obsessive blindness, he calls policemen villains and proves that he is as evil as the old man's eye. The second symbol is the watch. The narrator several times mentioned the watch. Watch is visual and auditory representation of time used several times, symbolized as the approaching death. The narrator has full control over the time of the old man's death, and that is why he compares himself to a watch's minute hand. Watch represents the journey towards death, whether it be a watch itself or a death watch in the wall, the period of 7 days, or the many times the narrator describes how very slowly he moved. Another symbol is the lantern. The lantern has been mentioned as a counter to darkness, as well as a source to light, to see the evil in its full force. The narrator finally kills the old man once the light is fully shed upon his evil eye, because he has seen the full force of the eye. If the eye is a representation of the narrator's evil or insanity, he must destroy that eye, which is a reflection of him. The lantern also represents the truth that the old man was never evil. Another symbol is the bed and the bedroom. The bedroom is such a place we feel ourselves safe in, because it's our own place. It is a retreat from any threat for us. But Poe shows the bedroom as a place of murder or even a burial, and the bed as a weapon, because it was deployed in the killing of the old man. Another symbol is midnight. Midnight is the darkest hour and enforces the evil tone of the story. As dark is associated with evil, the story is about doing evil things at evil hours. As it is still dark at 4 o'clock in the morning as midnight, that indicates that midnight is not only reflecting the evil actions, but evil inside the narrator himself. Then we have the bell and the ring of the bell. The bell represents and signals the end of the old man and the end of the narrator's assumed sanity. It also represents the end of the narrator's quest. And I have here to indicate that Poe wrote a poem about bells, and the theme of that poem was life and being young, growing old, and finally dying. So the last symbol I'm going to refer to is the heartbeat. The heartbeat symbolizes the narrator's guilt or fear, which ultimately torments him to the point that he admits the murder. He thinks it is the heartbeat of the old man he is hearing, but actually it was his own heart. His own heart beating after the old man is suffocated, dismembered, and then buried under floorboards. As a symbol of the narrator's insanity, the beating heart might only exist in his imagination, not in reality. So the use of short sentences by Poe also creates a rhythm like the heartbeat. The second stylistic device used in the short story is amplification. Amplification is repeating of a word or phrase, adding more detail to it so that it may not go unnoticed. So it's found in the story, in the quote I'm going to read, makes it more clearer. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Through using "but the noise steadily increased," the narrator is trying to convince about his sanity. He is, however, unable to convince anybody as the story goes on. He merely delves deeper into insanity. The third rhetorical device is apotheosis. Apotheosis, which asserts or emphasizes something apparently by ignoring or denying it, occurs throughout the short story because the narrator is trying to deny his madness. Just like in the opening words of the short story. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Fourth device is epithet. Epithet is another rhetorical device which is found in the story, and it is an adjective or adjective phrase, and it names an important characteristic of a character. Thus, the adjective phrase dreadfully nervous names the important characteristic of the character. Epithets wild audacity, dreadful silence, stifled sound, dreadful echo are used to convey the atmosphere of the scene. Rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are not answered by the writer, but their answers are clear. These questions are used to give emphasis or provoke or simply to drive conclusions from the facts available. Example, would a madman have been so wise as this? Why would you say that I am mad? For what had I to fear? Answers to these questions are very clear that the narrator who claims to be sane is actually mad. Another device is hyperbole. The use of hyperbole and exaggeration helps the reader to understand the mind process of a person who is completely mad. He says, quoting, I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. It took me an hour to place my whole head. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. So you can notice here the exaggeration used by the narrator. Another device is metaphor. Metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things, saying one thing is something else, not using like or as. The eye of the old man resembled a vulture's eye. A vulture's eye. This comparison shows the narrator's scary feelings about the eye. As the vulture is associated with evil in most of literature, the narrator told that it was the evil eye. Such a metaphor as one of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it, shows us that the narrator was afraid of the eye. It is said, The vulture is an evil bird and associated with evil in literature, so the narrator thought that it was the eye of evil. Later, the movement of the narrator compared with a watchman's hand moves more quickly than did mine. This metaphor shows how cautious the narrator was in opening the door. Okay, so the eighth device is anaphora. Anaphora is such a word or phrase which is repeated. It is a popular figure of speech involving repetition of the same word at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences to impart emphasis, unity, and balance at the beginning of a clause. In The Telltale Heart, anaphora has been used many times. Here are some bold-faced examples from The Telltale Heart. First example, I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. Objects, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insults. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. You should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceed, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation. I went to look. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. They heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. So the anaphoric expressions are effectively deployed to underline descriptive and emotional effects. The anaphoric use of words helps to intensify the situation and makes the atmosphere more intense and frightful. The reader waits for the next lines and events and very deeply understands the narrator's states of mind and his nervousness. Poe uses repetitions at the beginning of the story to show tension while insanity at the end of it. In this way, both style and content mirror each other throughout the use of anaphora, first in the beginning and then at the end. Within the story, the use of repetitions creates a frenzied tone that makes it clear that the narrator is not stable mentally. He even does not tell what he did to hide his crime. His repetition of no tells that he erased the old man completely. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. Another rhetorical device is personification. Personification is when an animal, object, or idea is given human characteristics by the author. In this short story, Death is personified as a person. All in vain, because Death is approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped his victim. So this personification has helped to develop the mood. It further tells that the narrator is extremely afraid of dying and considers Death's victim powerless in its hand. The unknown disease he is suffering from may be the fear of death. Moreover, the evil eye is also a personification of the eye, because I cannot be evil. Another device is simile. Simile, as you may know, is a comparison between two unlike things. It uses words like and as. There are some similes in this story, and they emphasize the quality and the state of something. I'm given here an example. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness. So the comparison of darkness with pitch is done with regards to the bedroom of the old man. Another example, a single dim ray like the thread of the spider. The ray and thread comparison has been made using like. Then we have a low, dull, quick sound such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton, or still dark as midnight. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. The comparison of heartbeat to a drum beat has been done using as. Another technique is flashback. Flashback means to take the readers back into past by interrupting ongoing scene to give background information. From this point of view, the whole story is a flashback, as the narrator is confessing his crime. Observe how happily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. And then he proceeds with telling past events. Another technique is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is the hints and clues that are provided by the writer and that suggest future events in the story. It is used to create suspense in the story. So I quote, "But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached and I fancied a ringing in my ear. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever." Foreshadowing clues in the story hint that the narrator killed the old man out of paranoia. He said, "I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I was a low, dull, quick sound. It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton." Paradox. Paradox is an absurd and contradictory statement that can be true. It was never kinder to the old man, or he says in the story, "I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him." You see here, okay, so kindness and murdering. Two paradoxical, let's say, things. Irony. Irony means when opposite of what is expected happens. In The Telltale Heart, Poe has used many types of irony successfully to depict the events of the story. The speaker keeps saying that he is not crazy, but through his actions and speech we can make a conclusion that he is. After killing the old man, the narrator hides his heart beneath the floorboards along with the rest of the body parts. When the police arrive, the guilt of killing causes his own undoing, and here irony is when he admits killing of the old man. Irony in the story is used in three different ways. We have verbal irony, which means that a character knowingly exaggerates something, but in fact he means something else. The verbal irony depicts that he was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before killing him. He calls himself calm, logical, and sane, but in fact he is really insane and agitated, who confesses his crime as a reaction to ticking sound of the old man's heartbeat, as he claims. Thus, through his words, he claims he is not insane, but through his actions, it is clear that he is insane. At the end of the story, another example of verbal irony is present when, agitated by the ticking sound, he shrieks, "Villains, dissemble no more." Then we have the situational irony in The Telltale Heart, tells that madmen are not reasonable, but in the story, justice seemingly bothers him a lot. He successfully completes the murder and hides that body in such a perfect manner that the policemen do not suspect him. The situation is fully under his control, but he merely confesses because he hears the old man's heartbeat. The line, "I loved the old man, he had never wronged me, he had never given me insult, for his gold I had no desire," also depicts situational irony because he only wanted to kill the old man due to his own madness and nothing else. Last type or kind of irony is dramatic irony. Dramatic irony means when something happens in the story that is more meaningful to the reader than the characters, because the reader knows something and characters do not know. It is ironical that the police do not know about the murder while the reader knows. So the dramatic irony is at its peak as in the story. It reads, "I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim." Yet it is that the policemen remain unaware and have not suspect on the criminal. Also, in the beginning, the reader becomes aware of the fact that the narrator is insane, but the narrator himself claims that he is not mad. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses. Among the syntactical devices used in the short story, we have first repetition. I heard, there was none, I had never, he had never, close, steadily, cautiously, all in vain, then we have louder and louder. So this repetition is used to transfer the feelings of the main hero or the main character, especially his nervous state of mind. Poe uses a lot of repetition. It helps to intensify the situation, to make the atmosphere of the story more intensive and frightful. We are waiting what will be the next. Such repetitions help the reader understand the narrator's nervous state and his feelings. Another syntactical device is inversion. Just like in the example, "For his gold I had no desire, had I felt," I then replaced, used to draw attention, true nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation, I used to develop the flow of the story and to convey the situation of nervousness. Then we have the use of alliteration. As a deliberate phonological device, alliteration is associated mostly with literary and especially poetic language. As Wells suggests, the foregrounding of sounds is often used for emphasis and to aid memorability. Alliteration is the repetition of the initial consonant in two or more words. And here are some examples from the short story. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart is increased. I grow quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. They were making a mockery of my horror. It is the beating of his hideous heart. So you can notice here the, let's say, alliteration. Another distinctive or remarkable devices used in the short story are the manner adverbs. As we know, adverbs generally convey information about the manner, degree, time, or place of an event or action. Manner adverbs tell us how an action is performed. And upon observation, I would argue that another potential factor that contributes to the total effect is Poe's distinctive use of manner adverbs to create certain element of suspense to the story at some point. In The Telltale Heart, the narrator nightly visits the old man's chamber. Takes place precisely at midnight, in darkness and in silence. When he is describing how he creeps into the old man's room and what he does to him in detail, time seems to slow down and almost stand still. Every action seems to occur in extremely slow motion, as conveyed in the adverbs gradually, slowly, gently, cautiously, steadily, stealthily, etc. The use of cunningly and cleverly also indicates the narrator's perverse pride in his own sagacity and skillfulness. If we observe the concordance example in more detail, we can see another distinctive feature, namely repetition in the use of the adverbs. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I may not disturb the old man's sleep. I ended the lantern cautiously, or so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I ended it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture's eye, kept pushing it on steadily. So it should be obvious that the repetition of slowly, cautiously, and steadily combined with some degree adverbs, very, and so, creates a greater, more intensified and prolonged force than usual. At this point, we as readers, following the narrator's viewpoint, seem to be preoccupied with the narrator's murderous action. Short phrases also intensify the horror that could be sensed within the tale. An interesting phrase in the tale is when the colon is used 3 times within only one sentence. The ringing became more distinct. Okay, so the quotes read, the ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. So here the narrator seems to have completely lost his touch with reality, leaving only with the sound that in the end he realizes it is not made up within his mind. After all, the sound is too loud to spring forth from his imagination. The panic-stricken man is not only noticeable for the readers through his actions and his way of thinking, but is also clearly seen through the language that the writer used. Thus, language is the function of both storytelling as well as portraying the neurotic fears and obsession with death that the man is both suffering from. As we see, the story is really rich on stylistic devices. Poe in his short story has extensively used literary and rhetorical devices to prove insanity, obsession, guilt, tension, and many other themes and motives that develop the story. All these devices give not only meaning to the text, but also make the quality of the text very powerful in very Poe fashion, if we may say so. Looking at the text in great detail and observing its various parts in fact makes functions performed by various devices clear in the context of the passages of this short story. During the reading, it is given the impression that you hear that heartbeat, the low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton, that the old man's eye, a pale blue eye with a film over it, are piercing into you. So in this story, Poe takes us to the mind of a madman as he struggles with the thoughts that caused him to do the unthinkable, killing the old man.